African countries have long advocated for reforms in the United Nations Security Council, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to address what they perceive as imbalance of power and representation. The nature of reforms African countries would like to see vary, but here are some common areas where they express concern. Expansion of the United Nations Security Council. African countries have called for an expansion of the United Nations Security Council's membership, particularly in the category of permanent seats, to better reflect the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. They argue that Africa, as the second most populous continent and with its strategic importance, should have permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council. African countries also seek increased representation in the non-permanent seats at the United Nations Security Council to ensure that African concerns and perspectives are adequately represented in decision-making process. They want limitations on or the abolition of veto power held by the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, as they believe it hinders effective decision-making and prevents timely resolutions of conflict, especially in Africa. On the World Bank, African countries want greater voting power and influence in the decision-making process of the World Bank. They argue that the distribution of voting power should be more equitable, reflecting the economic contributions and needs of African nations. They also want a reform of the conditionalities attached to the loans and aid provided by the World Bank. African countries aim to have more flexibility in implementing policies that align with their specific development needs, rather than being subjected to externally imposed conditions. Same thing they want from the International Monetary Fund. African countries want reforms at the International Monetary Fund, lending practices to minimize the imposition of strict conditionalities and to ensure that debt sustainability and social development concerns are adequately addressed. That is exactly what African nations are asking for from the United Nations Security Council, the World Bank, and the IMF. They want seats on the table